Okay, welcome back, everybody. I know a few people are still filtering in, but we'll get started with the next talk. So next, I'm going to be introducing Dr. Heather Brown, who is going to present on learning difficulties. Dr. Brown was originally trained as an elementary school teacher, but she is now an assistant professor in the Department of Education Psychology, Special Education at the University of Alberta. During her graduate training, she completed a Master's of Education in Educational Psychology, a PhD in Speech and Language Sciences, and a postdoctoral fellowship in Developmental Psychology at the University of Western Ontario. Dr. Brown's research program investigates the academic achievement of students with autism spectrum disorder and focuses on answering two key questions. First, how well do students with ASD perform academically across subjects and domains? And second, what features of ASD led to academic strengths or weaknesses? Dr. Brown has Asperger's syndrome, and I would like for you to all join me in welcoming her up to share her talk.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the chance to come and speak to you all today. So I was asked to talk about learning difficulties, which, as you just heard, makes sense given that's what I study. So I myself am on the autism spectrum, and for me, school was one path that led me to be able to engage meaningfully in the world, and so that's one of the pathways that I'm examining in my research to see if that can be successful for other kids. And all these beautiful people are actually all the wonderful people that work in my lab. So we've got undergraduate RAs and graduate students, and they're all a wonderful team. And if you know any of the wonderful individuals that works with Lonnie, you'll see that many of them are the same. So right now we are running a study. We're actually running two, but I just put up the one about math. So this one is about math. We're also running one on narrative writing. And we're looking for kids who are on the autism spectrum. And if you think that your child might be interested in this, please contact us. We find that a lot of kids with autism love doing this because they get to work one-on-one with a beautiful RA who's going to give them all sorts of attention and time. So if you think your child might like working with one of our wonderfully trained people, please let us know. So I was asked to talk about autism and academics, and basically I thought to myself, that's not going to be something I can do in 10 minutes or 20 minutes, because there's thousands of autisms and there are thousands of learning difficulties, and I couldn't possibly cover all of the ways that those interact and intersect in 20 minutes. But nevertheless, I'm going to try to tell you something that still is useful and interesting and hopefully helpful. So one thing that you have to remember, like I just said, is that autism tells you very little about how a child might succeed academically at school. It tells me almost nothing. I need to know a lot more about that child beyond his diagnosis of autism or her diagnosis to be able to predict whether or not that child will struggle or succeed at school. And another thing that's really important to remember is how stressful it is on parents to have a child with autism who is also experiencing academic challenges. My son is not quite on the spectrum, but basically on the spectrum, if that makes any sense. But he has significant academic challenges, and I find that overwhelming. It's a lot of work that you have to do to put in and to support that child. So I just want to acknowledge all the things that you already are doing and how much you and how much work it is for us. Why might someone with autism struggle at school? So there are a million reasons why someone with autism might struggle at school, but the one that I thought I might focus on for this particular study would be for this talk would be executive functioning. So when I say executive functioning, many of you might go, what? What's that strange term that she's using? Well, it's one of those weird terms that we use in academia. But basically what it means is it's how you control your behavior, and if you can use your behavior to direct yourself towards some long-term goals. Executive functioning skills help us plan, help us focus attention, help us switch gears, and they help us juggle multiple tasks. And so much like an air traffic control system at a busy airport, executive function regulates the flow of information and our focus on tasks. It creates mental priorities, and it helps keep the system flexible and on time. And the Harvard, the Center on the Developing Child at Harvard University says that building these blocks, or these early building blocks of these skills, is one of the most important and challenging tasks of the early childhood years. So even as I read that list about planning, attention, switching gears, juggling multiple tasks, I'm sure you're all thinking about all the ways in which your child may struggle with those things. It's important at this point to remember that children usually have uneven profiles, though, in their executive functioning skills. So you might be really good at some of them and really terrible at other of them. It's not like you can just say that children with autism have, universally poor executive functioning. That's not true. But what I can say that is true is that they often are weak. And what you can see on the boy's head is, again, a bunch of lists of different executive functions. So controlling your impulses and focusing and being patient and taking turns. And having weak executive functioning skills often has a really profound effect on your academic skills. And so that's why I thought I would focus a little bit on these executive functions. And just like the last speaker said, I think it was Dr. Reynolds said, was talking about surrogates. And so one thing that we can do for our children is we can act as a surrogate frontal lobe. So why am I saying frontal lobes all of a sudden? Well, it's because we believe that our executive functions are developing in our frontal lobe, and those frontal lobes actually develop all the way up until you're 21. So even if you're like my son and you have significant delays in executive functioning, he will continue to develop. And a lot of what I do is trying to organize his world and keep him engaged enough until he cares enough to do it for himself. But it's a lot of work. It's a lot of scaffolding. It's a lot of putting in all of these basically supports. And so adults can support the emergence of their children's executive functioning until they can practice and perform these skills on their own. So just as a construction worker is going to remove the scaffolding when the building can support itself, over time adults can reduce the scaffolding activities and allow children to organize themselves and get their stuff done without constant reminders and direction. But you have to remember to be very patient. My son is 14 and I'm still giving him constant reminders and directions. We constantly have to remind ourselves that, first of all, EF doesn't develop for any kid by the time they're 12. And so any kid is going to struggle with these all the way through adolescence. And then if you're delayed on top of that, you have to be even more patient because these skills are hard. They're really hard to learn. So how can you be your child's surrogate frontal lobe? Well, you can make your tasks shorter. You can make your steps more explicit. You can make sure to give lots of reminders and create schedules. You can give them lots of variety and choices. You can try and minimize distractions. So one thing that I had to do for myself, you know how we get all those handy reminders on all of our electronics? It got to the point, my frontal lobe cannot handle these constant distractions. I had to turn them all off. Like I literally can't do it. I get pulled in so many different directions. So you do, but at the same time, quote unquote, minimizing distractions, you also have to remember that you can't bore the child. They can't have so little around them that they're not stimulated at all. It's a constant balance between getting enough stimulation but not too much. And of course, we can provide organizing structures like having clean desks and putting things in places where they go and having various storage bins. Now, I don't see how I could possibly have talked for 20 minutes already. Did we start a little bit late? Okay. Otherwise, something's really wrong with my presentation. Okay, so what I wanted to talk just for the last little bit is something called cognitive strategy instruction. And why am I talking about this? Well, the way I learned to succeed at school was I learned to memorize all these rules and strategies for how you got things done. And you had to make those very explicit for me. And what we know from research is this is something that works really well for kids. So not only did it work for me personally, but we know from research it works for a lot of kids. So what is a strategy? Well, strategy is purposeful behavior in order to meet some kind of desired goal, but it's also procedural knowledge about how to accomplish that goal. So strategies can be a set of step-by-step instructions or techniques in how to accomplish a goal, such as how to write a paragraph. We might say begin with a topic sentence, follow up with supporting details, and finish with a concluding sentence. But strategies can also be more general guidelines, such as when you're describing an important event, it's important to include the answers to who, what, where, when, and why. That helps kids, if we think about that, what that strategy often helps kids add more description. But what are strategies? Well, in essence, a strategy is simply a tool used to accomplish a task. It concentrates and enhances your effort, just like using a lever allows us to move heavy objects easily. So strategies allow us for enhanced performance. Most of us use these strategies continually without even realizing it. They're so integrated into our everyday life. Like when we write ourselves notes, or we think to ourselves about, oh yeah, the rule to spell that is I before E except after C. Like we use these kind of strategies all the time, and they can run from very simple to very complex. But we have to remember that it's students who are using these sort of strategic strategies are what separates poor learners from more advanced learners or more effective learners. So what are strategies? Well, they're goal-directed, consciously controllable processes that facilitate our performance. They are always intended to perform a definite function, and it's something that I'm consciously controlling. So I have to be aware that I'm using it and that I can manipulate it. So this is how I'm doing X, and this is why I'm doing it. So if a strategy is to be self-regulated, it has to be conscious. It can't be something that's unconscious, otherwise we're not regulating. And then finally, strategies facilitate our performance. So you can do things that are better, easier, and more quickly when you use a strategy. But interestingly, it's not just about strategies. There's actually something called cognitive strategy instruction. And it's an explicit instructional approach, which means that I'm going to tell you step by step what I want you to do. It was very telling to me. My son ended up in the Glenrose inpatient psych unit, which is called 301, for about 6 months. And he had been in a school that was very open concept. It was very project-oriented, collaborative, not structured, very, like, you needed intrinsic motivation to really get things done. And my son, of course, failed miserably. Like, you cannot take someone who has executive functioning difficulties and put them in that environment. And it was so telling, but that is what we teach. That is what I teach to pre-service teachers. That's what people taught us, is how important this collaborative problem-solving, project-based methods are. But it was so revealing to me when I saw Aiden in the Glenrose, and he was sitting there doing a worksheet that was just fill in the blanks. And that kid was so compliant in that moment. He was focused, he was sitting still, he was filling it in because it was structured. It made sense to him. He knew when he started and he knew when he was going to be done. So it's that kind of sort of approach that we can take in all sorts of different areas of academics. What we find is that students will use these types of strategies more frequently with increasing age and grade level. We know that kids in middle and late elementary school mix effective and ineffective strategies. That means it's normal to not always use effective ones. And what we do is when you become particularly skilled in a domain, those people, generally those who are very skilled, have a lot of effective strategies, and they are able to choose among those strategies. In contrast, kids who have learning difficulties use ineffective and inappropriate strategies. They have a limited repertoire. They have trouble applying strategies in new situations, and they often fail to recognize when a strategy is not working. So cognitive strategy instruction teaches students how to approach the tasks and how to use knowledge to solve their problems. And what we want to do is we always want to use this gradual release model. So we want to be able to teach these students to use these strategies and help guide them until they can become independent. And so we know that we have all sorts of academic strategies that we can use. So in writing, we might teach children how to take notes and then how to organize them using colored highlighters or colored stickies. In reading comprehension, we might teach them a strategy about overviewing the text before reading and asking myself, what are the main sections? And in math, I might try to estimate the answer before I actually solve it, so I know if my solution is close to what it should be. But there's also formal cognitive strategy development. And this is one model that's incredibly well researched, and it has a ton of information about how effective it can be for both children with disabilities and learning how to write, as well as students who are just struggling to write, as well as all students. So it's got a lot of self-regulation embedded in this program. It has a lot of executive functioning support. And it has, it's not that expensive. Like, you can buy this book for maybe $50 off of Amazon. So and the website that's listed there has also got a lot of free resources if you wanted to learn more. But basically, this type of model has been used with students with ASD who were struggling writers, and the research showed that in these small studies, they got better. There is a ton of research that shows that kids with writing disabilities get better when they go through this program. We also have that book in the library, the education library, on campus if you wanted to view it for free. And here's an example of a strategy that comes from SRSD, which is basically the tree model about how to write an essay. I'm not going to go through it, but this is the type of thing where everything is made very explicit, and you know exactly, it's like putting things into boxes. And we find that that can be really helpful for kids. And I just want to leave you with this last one. I know you can't read it very well, but they have the exact same types of things for math. So in this particular slide, it's called Solve It, and it has a whole, again, it has a whole sort of strategy or set of steps that they can follow in order to learn how to solve mathematical problem-solving skills. And so that was the end of today's presentation. Thank you very much for having me, and please let me know if you have any questions. Yes.
Thank you very much. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, from the very beginning. Like, they're not going to be as effective when they're 5 as they are when they're 12. But no, just like self-regulation, everything we've been learning about today, you can start from the very beginning, even if it's as simple as a few step, like a 3-step part question. I brush my teeth and these are my steps, right? It's about making it just very concrete, explicit, and you can sort of check and follow to make sure that they've gone through each step.
Have you seen a correlation more parts of outcomes with found in
Absolutely, yes, absolutely. And when my kid, I think you said your daughter was very young, or your son? Yeah, so when my son was very young, I used to make these schedules using like stick figures, right? Like, because I can't draw, but I can make a bunch of stick figures. So it can be like a really fun activity that you can do together for sure. Any other questions? Yes. Yeah, there is. I don't know it offhand, and I ran out of time last night to pull it all. But if you put in cognitive strategy instruction into Google and you put reading comprehension, I'm sure something would come up. Yep. Yeah? Oh, yeah. Big time.
Yeah.
Yeah. I do the earplugs. So have you heard of musicians' ears? So musicians' ears, if you go to your audiologist, you can actually get, it's almost like a hearing aid mold. It's made out of silicone, but it has a filter in it that makes, so it just attenuates your sound without removing the clarity. So it makes every sound in my environment, say 15 decibels quieter. And I find that really takes off the edge of some of that sensory stuff. I also always sit right at the front of the class, right in front of the overhead, because then I can't see anything. So the people beside me who are moving or fidgeting or just have hair, or, you know, like, I mean, you know, like, they're just in my space. But if I'm right at the front of the class, then I can't see any of that sensory stuff going on around me, and that really helps me. Even in yoga, I go to yoga every morning. I gotta be right at the front because I just can't handle the sensory input from around me. So, and then the other thing that I do is heavy work. So if I have to sit in a really long lecture and I get really antsy and fidgety, then I get out of my seat when there's a break and I like walk up as many flights of stairs as I can, because just getting my heart rate up, and so I get a little bit hot inside, like you have to actually get a little bit warm. That's going to take that adrenaline and just get it out of my system and allow me to sort of sit down and focus a little bit more. Okay, well, thank you for having me.
Thank you very much, Heather, for coming.
Thank you.